Hi, Cave Explorers. Mrs. Rooney here. Today, our art lesson is going to connect with your social studies, Paleolithic cave, and prehistoric cave art assignments that you've completed. And you and I, are going to create images similar to what was found in the Lascaux cave along the border of France and Spain. And remember, these were created thousands of years ago, up to 15,000 years ago, which is crazy. And these were created as we've been told, and what we assume because we don't know for sure, but it was the earliest form of social communication. And by drawing some of these figures through the ages, they would fade away, and then they would draw new, fresh uh, animals on top of it. So you can tell there's kind of layers of animals, and some of these are recognized as being extinct in these caves. And so now we can see how animals have evolved a little bit by just seeing some of these animals that were drawn in these caves. One thing I noticed that was really cool, I wanted to point out, was this bird figure. And so it was definite that there was the earth line and then these animals that roamed, some in herds, it looked like. This obviously was not the same herd because they're moving in different directions and they don't look the same. Um, but there's this bird figure in the sky. So this is identified as the sky. And then I don't know if these are fissures, cracks in the cave, or if they're actually how we do birds in the distance, is just their form. And then here's these birds kind of creeping in along the side, and then it's cut off. So we don't know beyond that. But just to give you an idea, this image here it was about 11 and a half feet long. So that's about three of fourth graders laid in a line, long in length, right? Or two maybe adults laid in a line from head to toe. That's how large these figures were in this cave. Another thing we have to remember is that when you and I create this, we have the luxury of daylight. And Mrs. Rooney found in one of my art books, this great rendition of what the cave looks like. And here, of course, it shows us as the entry to the cave. And then this particular piece was called the Hall of Bulls. And so this Hall of Bulls they found right here, these cave explorers found. And then it's actually hundreds. It shows the feet here. It's actually hundreds of feet um, into the cave. And then, of course, there's these arms that branch out in the cave. And so there's more art that was found way down here, which is again 100 more feet. And then this well here was where some more was found, and then on in through the finger as well. And so they had to take bowls, clay bowls, and they put animal fat in there. And they would take this moss or a plant that burned slow, and they used it as a wick in the middle of their bowl, and they would light it. And then that would be their light to see what they were doing, because of course you get beyond the cave entrance, and of course there's no more light, and the deeper you go the darker it is, of course. So that's kind of a fun fact to keep in mind. You could go in your basement, right? This would be a way to connect, would be thinking about going in your basement, and there's very little light anyway, and then having to use a very small flashlight to see what you were doing, which would be cumbersome. We're so used to having the luxury of electricity that we don't consider that when we're working with art. Okay, one more thing before we get started with what we need and our materials we need to collect is that um, these figures were not intended to have this great art um, platform. They were drawn very simply. And again, they were always from the side view. And what's interesting is usually we don't see horns, both horns, unless if we're looking straight on, but they always identified both horns so that you and I, that's something we wouldn't notice if we look from the side view. We would only see the one horn, right? Like this. And so we would never know that there were two. And so that is something that was really interesting is that they always put two to so that it showed um, the audience that there were always two horns. And here's this great figure back here with two horns, two, 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 two. This one didn't have them, but maybe just a little stubble. So it's really interesting how you can start to look and think deeper about these paintings. Okay, what we're going to need today is a brown paper bag. And it could be an Albertsons bag. It could be from any grocery store. If you don't have one, and the next time you go to the store, ask the teller or the clerk that's helping you if you can just have one. They'll give you one. But what you're going to do with this bag is you're actually going to cut it open, and you're going to take this bottom rectangle off. Mrs. Rooney has started it so that I won't take up too much of your time. But you just want to cut the bottom piece out of your bag. And you can save that to use it as to put some of your materials on. And then you're going to open it up and you're going to have this great long bag. And you can keep it long if you want. However, it's easier to work with. You'll have a really nice piece if you cut it exactly in half. It's going to be even a little bit larger than 11 by 17 sheet of paper. And so you're going to need a bag, okay? The next thing you're going to need are some materials. And some of the natural things that Mrs. Rooney has found, and I know that snow is coming our way. We're expected to have snow. And so you might not be able to find some natural things in the yard if you're watching this after it has snowed. So there's also some things that I've collected from inside my house that you might be able to find that will be useful as well. And then of course you'll have your color crayons you can use, and then you can use sidewalk chalk or pieces of chalk. So keep in mind the different colors that they used. Remember, who can tell us? Yeah, I kind of gave it away by showing you some of my materials, but you're right. That was one of the questions that you had to answer. It was brown, yellow, red, and black. Those were some of the main colors that were found in these caves, and a lot of them, a lot of those colors, of course, were ground from the rock that was nestled in the hillsides of these mountains, and of course in these caves. And so they would grind them up into these powders. So moving on, Mrs. Rooney went for a nice walk along the river, and of course there's some great rock formations along the riverbed. And so I took some of these I took some of the dirt that has been colored from the um, minerals in the rock. And when the rock bleeds out the minerals, it colors the soil. And it also crushes some of that rock into tiny little pieces that mix in with this great soil. So I found three different colors. I found this kind of dark brown color, a light brown color, and then this actually has a red tone to it, the soil. And so again, there's so many minerals in here that are great. These are actually herbs that I actually collected from my cabinet in my kitchen. And so you might find that some of these herbs, which are created from plants, right, that are grown and they flavor our food, but they have this great color, and you can actually mix it with a little bit of water to create a little bit of a paint. And I'm going to mix some water with these two items as well. And then you might drink tea yourself, or your parents might, or guardian might have tea in the house. And so open up a tea bag. And what tea is, it is again just leaves and herbs from plants, different types of plants, to flavor our water. And so inside, you're left with these pieces. And if you mix it with water, it'll actually give a nice stain as well. Charcoal is something they did use back in the prehistoric day. And as you know, charcoal is a type of a wood. When it's burned, it leaves this great dark um, um, coloring to the piece of wood. And so this is something I'm going to use as well, because I barbecue with these charcoal pieces. And so I'm going to use that for some coloring. And then I have a few pieces of chalk and some crayon that we could follow up with. Um, just to give you an idea of what some of this is going to look like, is that you're going to be adding some water to mix up some of this mud coloring. And then, of course, I'll have to add a little bit more water to this paste. But this is one of these herbs that is has a little bit of water in it to make this paste. And I want to make sure it's more of a paint. And then here's some other. Another idea would be borrowing a little bit of coffee from your house. Make sure that you're not using hot coffee. Set it aside, a cup aside, and make sure it's very cool to the touch. But this has a great stain effect when using it. And then one more thing, that I made beets the other night, and so for the red coloring, I took some of that beet juice. And if you've eaten raspberries or fruits or some vegetables and you spill it on yourself, it does stain. All right. So I want you to gather some materials. Here's some sticks, and I'm actually I don't have a feather, but I was thinking I could use this plant as a little bit of a brush stroke. I'm going to try it and see. And then here's some different sticks. And I like these small pieces that I can use to apply, because I'm going to try not to use any paint brushes. I'm going to use all natural things, sticks from my yard. I tried to grab a few leaves. I don't think that they will, there's not many leaves left this time of year, but I don't think that they're going to hold out. But I'm just trying to use my imagination. So I want you to pause this video and collect all your things. Go ahead and mix up your whatever you come up with, your little tray of paints, and I'll meet you back here and we'll move forward. All right, fourth grade, welcome back. I have a question for you. How did you communicate before you could read or write? Your parents were around you when you were born, and you recognized their face. And you probably started to recognize the expressions on their face. And so you were learning what emotions were. And then as you grew up a little bit older, you started to recognize your home and the items around your home. And you did this through a visual aspect. Those that loved you then started to read to you. And you would recognize through pictures different things that you could connect with. You have fingers, and here's some young child's fingers. And then you also started to identify these strange figures, which were letters. And then, of course, you would move on and start to recognize numbers as those that loved you read to you, and you started to learn what they were. I found this great um, cave finding, and this is actually from Montana. There is a cave over near Billings that was discovered about, or that was created. These were created about 200 years ago, and by the American, Native American tribes that passed through. And they say that they would stop in the caves from time to time and for refuge during different weather, or to create this great art. And so when you look at this, this could be an early language. It could be something that they were trying to keep track of, like a calendar, or days. And so they started to, you can recognize, use their fingers to either create some sort of a language, or they would keep track, right? Like we started to count on our fingers and we still do. So this is an early form of communication, much like you learned when you were younger. So think about that. And then, if you didn't live on a farm growing up, you started to recognize different things through books, right? Visually seeing what a cow looks like, or what a cow looks like up close because you didn't live on a farm. Then you started to recognize different types of cows through pictures and reading. And that's how you gained knowledge about what was outside of your home. This was a way that they communicated. Again, this was the Chinese horse that was found in the Lascaux cave. And this was about 4 feet, 8 inches long. And again, it was created about 15 to 13,000 years ago. And then here in this particular one, there's these hunting tools. There's these arrows with this texture that makes us think of a feather from an arrow, and there's a sharp tip at the end. Um, and then again, there's this could have been some sort of um, a tool used in hunting as well. And then there's this great formation of this horse and the different coloring and shades they used to describe those colors back of the horse back then. And we will certainly utilize that today. Okay, that just gives you an idea to connect with communication. All right, you are going to take your piece um, of sack, and you're going to, or your bag, and you're going to crumple it all up like this. And then I want you to open it up. And you notice it starts to make these really cool wrinkles. And then I want you to crumple it up again really tight. And do that a few times. And then you're going to go underneath the water. And I'm going to pretend this is the faucet. And I'm going to stick it underneath the water. And I'm going to let the water run. And I'm going to open it up. And then I'm going to let the water run. And I'm going to close it and open it up. And then what you're going to do is let that drip. Don't make a mess out of your mother's kitchen. And that is why you need to put something down, like Mrs. Rooney used newspaper, or you could take the other part of your bag and lay it out so that you don't stain anything, or it's really easy to clean up then because all you have to do is get rid of the newspaper. So anyway, let your drips drain, and then open up um, your bag, and it's going to feel almost like leather or cloth. It's going to be really flimsy, and it's going to have this nice wet quality to it. And it's up to you. You can let it dry a little bit. One thing about our surface is that it's not stone, right? And so some of the materials that we have collected are going to bleed into this, or this bag is going to absorb it and it's going to be really fun. But why I chose the bag is because it looks like it has texture on it. And it does have texture, but it looks like very much similar to the Lascaux cave. um, you notice all of this texture in the cave. And so it's not easy to draw. They mentioned in some the readings that they would smooth out some of the areas with stone or rock, but sometimes they utilized some of this great um, form to go along with the picture. I mean, this almost looks like a cloud coming in, doesn't it? Because we recognize this bird up in the sky. And so it kind of looks like that from the picture. And then here's this great, really dark coloring that looks like the earth. And so there's these textures. And that's why we're going to use the bag because it gives this great texture and it's going to make it look kind of old, which is fun. All right. You should have collected. I'm just going to put all of my materials along the edge here as I use them, um, so that you can see them a little bit. I'll certainly share mine as well, so that you can get a good visual. I have collected quite a few. You only have to have a few. It's fun to have one of something of every color. Okay, and I'm going to start out, again, I'm going to put these where you can see them. I'm going to start out using the coffee um, along the edges because coffee has this really deep stain to it. It stains your teeth if you're a coffee drinker really easy. It stains your finger. It could stain if you have a white sink and you poured some coffee down there and left it for a few minutes, it would stain that quickly. So I'm just going to use some of this because when this dries, this brown stain is going to make it look like a layer of rock or a layer of minerals came through there. And coffee is kind of a natural from a bean, even though we don't have coffee beans that grow here in Montana, but parts of the world have coffee beans, and we certainly have access to that. All right. Next, I'm going to be thinking about what animals um, have maybe first arrived in Montana. Okay, so think about that for a minute. We think of the different animals we have in Montana. You can pause this video and go grab maybe a couple of different outlines of animals that you can look at. I don't want you to cut them out and trace them because I want these to be your own. Remember, we're not looking for a lot of detail in our figures. We just want simple outlines, right? Because we want it to make it look as authentic as possible. So grab some pictures if you want, or some books of different animals that we have in Montana. And then or you can draw your own because certainly some of the forms are in stick forms as well. It could be an outline or you can just draw a stick form. So I'm going to take a piece of and I'm going to use a small piece of the charcoal, and I'm going to just start creating a few stick figures. And I'm going to put those in the background, and then I might utilize some bigger forms. But I'm gonna create. I am gonna put a little human form in there, just something very basic. I'll make it big enough here so that you can see it, and so that you can identify. But I'm taking this charcoal, and it's oh my gosh, it's gonna stand out pretty well because it my bag is nice and wet. So I have this head here, the body, I have a leg coming out, and a leg kind of bending forward in a motion, like it's going to, can you identify this? Yeah, kind of looks like an arrow, right? All right, and so what is this human doing? Yeah, it's looking for food. Remember that these pictures that they created were forms of survival for them. They very much regarded animals. Um, we know that in early days, and we certainly know through the beautiful American Native American heritage is that they really um, honored the animals for what they gave to us as humans. Um, the early humans, especially with surviving, they needed food, right? Okay, so then I'm going to draw a couple of these horn figures that might be um, a deer or an elk. Okay, and I can even branch off a little bit on the horns to make it look like they're a little bit older, right? Because the more branches on the antlers, the older the animal is. It starts out with just tiny ones, and then of course they get bigger. And of course, the bigger the animal, the more food that they would be able to utilize and feed more people. Okay. All right. So that's kind of fun. That's just simple, very easy forms. I want to come up with some of your own. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to try an outline of a larger animal. And I'm thinking maybe a bison. I'm going to try it and see how it works. I'm not going to um, be hard on myself because I want to just create something really easy, just an outline, and then of course you can kind of frill the end of the tail just a little bit. Just adding a little bit of texture um, lets the reader or the person that's your audience know that this this creature actually had fur on it. And so they did this by just adding lines. And sometimes they even had a little bristle. And what I mean by bristle, like this, they added this. And if you have a dog and you've ever seen your dog bristle up, it means that they're on high alert, that they feel like maybe there's a little bit of danger there. So that's kind of something you can think about too, is putting some emotion into it. Um, and then, of course, I'm going to just put some of these legs in here and the hooves. And just again, I'm just doing just a very basic outline, right? We don't want to um, we don't want to focus on the details. We just want these outlines. And of course, the bison roam. They were great creatures to provide for the Native Americans that lived hundreds of years ago here in Montana. And there was so much meat to them. And so they were so grateful. Okay, what is this bison missing if I want to identify that this particular animal had horns? Yeah, so I'm going to just draw a couple of horns here, and I'm going to draw two, even though I'm looking from the side profile. I want to create a couple of different horns so that the viewer knows that, oh, kind of, again, they're kind of, there we go. There, okay. So there's my horns. And then uh, we can put a little bit of hair down there too. That's kind of fun. All right. So now I've got a couple. Now I'm going to um, use some of my um, the soil that I found, and this is kind of a reddish. I'm actually going to look for a little darker brown or a lighter brown here, because remember what bison do in the winter? What do? They have all this great dark fur, but what happens um, after a nice winter coat um, has provided for them, and then in the summer, what happens? They start to lose some of this um, coat, don't they? And it kind of hangs on them. If you've ever been to Yellowstone or you've seen pictures, you can see that this coat kind of hangs off of them. So I'm going to have this layered look to my bison. And again, I've got this soil. And back then, keep in mind that um, humans um, in the prehistoric time would put animal fat. They didn't have access in the caves to water, but they had their animal fats. And so they would use the animal fat to kind of loosen up. They would use saliva sometimes from their mouths, or they would use plant juice or vegetable juices to, and what that would do, it would cause kind of a sticky adhesive so that they would stay on the walls. um, of course there was blood, and then of course sometimes they even, it's documented that they used urine, and it doesn't sound appropriate or um, but remember that they did not have a lot of materials, but they needed to have some sort of um, adhesive so that these would stay a long time there, and it would tell their story, right? So I'm gonna do this dark brown here, and then I'm gonna take and use some of this orange. And these techniques that we're doing is we're using these natural sticks, and some of the techniques that they used were brushing, smearing, dabbing, and spraying. And I'm using this piece of twig from one of my old plants in my yard. And then, of course, I have sticks. And then we could use a brush with this plant material. I'll try that in a little bit too. And so, brushing, they used feathers or they used plants, and they would brush on the material. And then, of course, smearing, you can just take your finger, right? And I was going to use some of this darker brown too to put in here. But I'm going to just dab and smear. So I'm dabbing, and then I'm going to just smear a little bit into the material that I'm using underneath. Okay. All right. So I'm getting this great um, textured look here, and I've got a couple of different colors. I'm hoping you can see the color change. I can even add a little bit of orange in there, just dabbing. Okay. Now, next, I wanted to show you there's one more technique that they used, and I'm not going to be doing it today, but it's called spraying. And an example of spraying is this what they found in this cave in Billings. And of course, they found them in the caves of Lascaux as well. But you would put your handprint down, they would, and then they would take their material and they would put it inside of, this is a straw, but they would put it inside of a feather because feathers are hollow, or they would put it inside of a reed or a plant that was hollow, or sometimes maybe even a bone, if all the marrow was out of it and it became hollow. But what they would do is they would put their paint inside of this, and then they would blow it like that, and it would, all of the color would go around. It would spray around, causing this great stencil, right? And then they would lift up their hand, and there would be this great stencil. So I'm going to try a handprint. It's really cool, this spraying effect. You can see that it really hit right around the hand area, and then it just lightly faded away. And that's what happens when it's sprayed on, which it gives this really cool effect. I'm going to use a smearing probably technique to kind of fade it out. But I'm going to use a handprint because that's a great form of communication. Okay, so I'm going to try that one next. And again, I just wanted to, I know this isn't a natural form, but I wanted to show you that blowing technique because that's something that they used often as well. All right, so I'm going to put my hand down next. Oh my gosh, this is so much fun. And I'm going to, I think I'm going to use red actually. I'm going to take, um, so I might use a couple different colors. I might use this yellow right around my fingers, and then I'm going to use you red around it to bleed because it might be too wet. And remember, that was the My red was the beet juice, and then here is this great herb that was used. I think this is cumin, actually. This spice is a cumin. And I'm going to create this yellow hand, and I'm using just a stick that I pulled off of the ground. Plenty of sticks out there, right? So you can use these sticks. And um, depending on what kind of a tip you wanted on your brush or your tool, you could, right, shave it down back then. So I'm going to create this hand. I'm going to get just the form of my hand around here. It would be fun to spray it on. That would be so fun. But again, that's probably an outdoor project. Maybe this summer I might try that. They seem really easy, these techniques, but think about how long it takes artists today with all the details. Think about how long that takes. And then this blowing technique that they used in the caves and some of this painting that they added into their and the coloring they added into their images took a long time and it took practice. And it did take a good eye to do this. It's like you're doing today. So fun. I hope you're having fun. All right. So there's my handprint. I'm going to not color inside so that it looks like a stencil, but I'm going to take, and your hands are going to get really dirty. So make sure that you have a cloth nearby or wait till the very end and then you can wash up. I'm going to just highlight this a little bit with some of this deep orange soil mixture, this dirt. I'm just going to add some of this just to outline it a little bit before I put some beet juice in. So I'm just brushing, right, with this. That's the technique I'm using. I'm using the brushing from this really soft stick from a plant um, or stalk from the plant. Just going to do a quick highlight around just to see. And I love this yellow though. I might take some of the yellow and just lightly add just a little bit of yellowing. If I put too much, it will take away from the stencil look, but I just want a little bit so that when this dries, it's just going to be so cool. It'll stand out a little bit more. Okay, then let's see, what's the best way? I'm going to take some of this really flimsy stick and I'm going to try, or let's see, maybe I might take just a little piece of plant. Got to decide here as we go along. See if the plant will work with this beet juice. And I'm just going to create a background. Oh, that's coffee. All right, I want the red. Ooh, look at this great beet juice. Oh my gosh, this is going to be so great. And this is going to go on the outside of my stencil. And remember how how intense this color is. And so it's going to stain. And so I don't want to use too much. And because my paper, this is another benefit to your paper being wet, is that you'll be able to smear it a little bit and it'll be able to pull away from the image a little bit. So, okay, so that's probably plenty of red. And so now you can see why they use blood, right? For red, because it's so intense, this red color. I have just a little bit too much. I'm gonna have to pull it up a little bit here. All right, and now I'm going to pull it out just a little bit farther so that it looks like it was kind of sprayed on. Remember, you can always add a little bit at a time. This is looking so cool. This is going to dry so neat. All right, and you notice too, bring back this finger a little bit by adding a little more definition to the line. So that doesn't go away. I want that to show up for sure. All right. So it does kind of look like, keep pulling it out a little bit more and a little bit more. But it does look like it was kind of sprayed on there. And I can then start to pull some of that dark outline out into it, some of the yellow, without losing the definition. I don't want to lose the definition of the fingers or the line of the fingers. That's what definition means. But I just want to pull this out a little bit so it looks kind of sprayed on there. So I've got this great bison. I've got this stick form here that definitely communicates what? Hunting. Maybe I'll draw one hoof print and then maybe one arrowhead, a little closer look to it as an arrowhead maybe, because that's some of the things that the Native Americans used. And I'm going to use kind of an orangey brown this time. Dump some of my orange in there. A little more of an orangey look in here. Okay. Kind of a darker orange brown. Okay. So now let's see. Well, since I did a bison, I might just do some simple bison hoof prints. Okay. And bison hoof prints, and again, you might have to do a little research on the internet, but bison hoof prints look a lot like this. There's one on each side with this great gap in between. I might take a piece of charcoal, my charcoal again. And I'm going to just outline that piece of hoof a little bit, just to kind of, so that you can see it a little better. Again, it's just a basic shape, right? We don't have a lot of detail in there. But if I were to place a couple of these hoof prints in here, it would tell my reader, would go along with the story, that this is what you would find, the evidence that bison roamed and walked. And then you would be able to see a smudge, it's brown inside of it. Man, dirt is so fun. This is what happens right when we're playing in the dirt outside. So fun to get dirty and messy. Okay, I might just bring out that hoof just a little bit more, because if it's a really thin, bisons were a little bit wider, not quite as wide as a moose, but wider than the tip. The bottom is a lot wider than the tip, and not quite as big as a moose, and not small like a deer. If any of you go hunting with an adult yet, you might identify deer tracks or even see them in your yard, depending on where you live in Great Falls. I live right in the middle, kind of by Vance IGA, kind of in the middle of the city. And yesterday I did see deer poop on my grass when I was trying to find some of these materials. So they do roam close to the river, since we're so close to the river. All right, that gives you an idea. Let me scoot this up so you can see those hooves. That gives you an idea of some hooves. All right, let's see about an arrow. Let's take a peek. Remember, this Chinese horse painting had these great, I'll hold it up here, these great little arrows here which showed us that they either had spears or arrows and they seemed to be floating toward, or maybe these were done before and then they put the animal in. It doesn't really say because they both are very visible. We can't tell if there's any fading. So let's try and create one of these feathers, arrowed arrows. Okay, I'm gonna take some. Let's see. Take a stick. I'm gonna get some of this color here. I'm going to have an arrow coming down. Remember, it starts out kind of thick up here, right where the feather is, and then it goes to this point like that, right? You can take and bring out the feather look to it at the end. And you might want to take a darker color, black or your dark brown, and just accent the define. Remember to make the lines, define your lines, a little bit of the feather. And then of course you can follow up with your charcoal. Like that. All right. You could have another one coming out here, right? A little bit wider, and then of course it comes down to a point. Okay. All right. Again, we create this in much respect for the animal because it was a means of survival and it was a way to communicate what animals lived around them in this time. Okay. All right.